さあいらっしゃい見せ物小屋こちらですよさあいらっしゃいいらっしゃい見せ物はこちらやってますよ
That right there is called a tanka. It was one of the ways you were enticed into stepping past those high reed walls into an Edo-era freak show. They were called Misemono, which translates as show or exhibition. You can also sometimes see them called Misemono Goya, which adds hut or shack to the end of the word. Exhibition hut. Show shack. However you want to refer to it in English is fine, but a misemono for hundreds of years had a lot going on. Part museum, part carnival, but with an overall vibe of what we know today as an old-fashioned freak show. Remember in the last episode, I talked about the ningyo, the mer people, and the Fiji mermaid mummies. Well, if you were an Edoite and you wanted to see one, a misemono was just where you went to gawk. Let's learn more. Uncanny Japan is author me, Thersa Matsuura, exploring all that is weird from old Japan. Strange superstitions and old wives' tales, cultural oddities and interesting language quirks. These are little treasures I dig up while doing research for my writing, and I want to share them with you here on Uncanny Japan. I hope you like the show. Hey, how are you? I've got a couple pieces of news that I want to relay before we get into weird territory. So first, I'm always giving virtual hugs and fist bumps to my patrons, as you often hear. Remember my little goal of getting 300 patrons by the end of the year? Well, we're up to 242, so that's incredible. And we're so much closer to the goal, and it's got me thinking about doing something special once we reach that 300 or beyond. So what to do? So the second bit of news is Audio Richard has gone above and beyond his Call of Duty by setting up an Uncanny Japan Discord server. If you're already a patron and you know what Discord is, check out the show notes for this episode at uncannyjapan.com, and there will be a link on a tutorial about how to connect your Discord account to your Patreon account. If you're not a patron, but you already know your way around Discord, there's an invitation link in this episode's show notes, and you're absolutely welcome to join the party. Of course, there's going to be a couple channels that won't be available to you because they're patrons only, and it's behind-the-scenes stuff, previews, recipes, VIP chat, stuff like that. If you have no idea what Discord is, it's basically just an app for group chat. You could Google what is Discord, and there's more information there. That's kind of what I had to do, actually. But both Richard and I look forward to seeing you there. Pop in, say anything, and we'll reply. And lastly, as I record this, the New Jersey Film Fest is going on. And as you know, Uncanny Japan's Tanuki Buttons episode was nominated for 3 awards: Outstanding Comedy, Best Series Premise, Narrative Fiction, and Best Leading Performance. I've been listening to the other shows nominated, and holy cow, they are so good. There are teams of people doing amazing work and making these shows, which makes me wipe away a couple tears that the two of us were even chosen to rub shoulders with these really cool cats. I'll let you know how it turns out, but if you want to go and peek at the New Jersey Web Fest website, they're also very active on Facebook and Instagram, Twitter too. You can kind of see what's going on real time, see how we're doing. With all that out of the way, let's get on with the show. Misemono. For at least 200 years, during the Edo era through to the early Meiji period, the misemono was a quite well-known, popular, and dare I say lowbrow form of entertainment. It was a show or exhibit held in urban, well-trafficked areas and very often on the grounds of temples or shrines. And while I just said lowbrow, I find it interesting that it was frequented by all levels of society, it kind of had something for everyone, as you'll soon learn. Actually, a version of the Misemono has lasted all the way up until modern times, but it has changed significantly. Things you could do back then, you just can't do now. And that's a good thing. Except just as recently as the 2000s, one show suffered the death of a performer and it had to close its proverbial doors forever. I think I read elsewhere that there is only one, show that is still continuing the tradition to this day. But it's hard to know for sure with the pandemic and everything. Besides, I don't want to talk about the modern-day Misemono. I want to talk about the old-timey ones. So let's concentrate on the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s. One definition I like states that a Misemono displayed the rare, the horrible, the obscene, which sounds about right. Of course, there were other forms of entertainment, like no play or kabuki, but they were refined and very expensive. A more accessible way to spend an evening was at the traveling Misemono, which mixed together elements of circuses, museums, zoos, and yes, freak shows. They were different sizes, from small to largish, and they lasted from a couple days to months. The simplest setup were several reed screens put up to shield the non-paying visitors' eyes, some benches inside, and a stage. These type could easily be disassembled at the end of the show and thrown together again the next day. The larger Misemono were sturdier board fences and wooden huts inside to hide various attractions. You'd have a relatively cheap entrance fee, then an extra fee for the more extravagant shows. So let's say a Misemono is coming to your town. What happens? Well, first, of course, they set up. Then someone goes and takes flyers to the barber shops and the public bathhouses, places where a lot of people frequent to get the word out. But they also had these long banners all around and on the roof of the exhibit to further lure curious bystanders inside. Then, when the Misemono opened, there was the tanka that started the show. Kind of like at the beginning of this show today. It's basically a sideshow barker, as it were. Let me give you an example of what you could see inside a Misemono. You had your tall people, like the 7'3" or 220-centimeter tall woman named Oyome, and your very short people. Your women who did snake dances called kankan. There were acrobats and jugglers and archers who shot arrows with their feet. At a certain Misemono, you might catch a sword swallower, a snake charmer, or a tortoise tamer. There was also at least one Misemono that had constructed a kind of mechanical snake that undulated of its own accord. There were also kelp structures. Not just weird stuff, but incredible craftsmanship was also on display, like intricate baskets made into fantastic shapes, items crafted out of mother of pearl, giant Buddhas, and kelp sculptures. But that's not all. The obake-yashiki, haunted house, was called a yabu, and it was also very popular. And something I'd personally be interested in was something called a kogushi, or kagushi. These were incense practitioners. I imagine them elegantly mixing together different combinations of powders and resins, sandalwood and cedar, and burning them for the crowd of people who would inhale deeply these magical and exotic fragrances. Oh, and there was the ubiquitous peep show, but I'm not going to tell you what went on in there. But as you can imagine, it was quite the free-for-all. Exciting, weird, scary, lascivious, enchanting. The Misemono had it all. There was one story about a Misemono that used to have two men suddenly break out into a fight and feign a duel with swords while balancing on meal trays. At the end of their harrowing show, they'd announced that they did that just to delight you. They were actually here to sell you some medications. Then they'd whip out 2 little paper packets filled with powder. "This one is our resurrection elixir," one of the men would announce. "It's a family secret, and it cures stomach cramps, food poisoning, seasickness, drunkenness, and excessive gas from both the mouth and the intestine." The other man would shake his little bag of powder and declare, "This one fixes decayed teeth and eliminates every noxious odor from your mouth." The audience would be like, "What's not to trust about these guys?" And they'd buy a whole bunch of the medicine before hurrying off to the next show. And it wasn't all about just watching, though. You could get a haircut, get a massage, buy toys for the children, buy sweets like something called white jade, and an agar-agar jelly dessert that seemed to be a whole presentation in and of itself, with the candy maker dangling long strands of candy from a second-story window. Or, if you wanted, you could nibble on tempura, gobble up stuffed inari pouches. Or can I interest you in some fried eel livers? Maybe you need your fortune told. Well, you could find just such a person to do that. They'd be walking around the grounds with lanterns attached to their collars. As other cultures imposed themselves on Japan, there were also introduced very curious animals never before seen by the Japanese people. Exotic animals like peacocks and tigers, wolves, parrots, porcupines, a donkey. And how about a 5-meter or 17-foot-long giant squid? And camels. A funny side note about the wolf: it escaped once from its cage on Rogoku Bridge and sent the entire city into a panic. And let's get back to camels, too, for a minute. Camels were really popular and the most expensive of the animals to see. To give you an idea, it cost about 8 mon, 15 cents, to get into a Misemono, with special exhibitions being extra. The camel exhibit cost about 32 mon, or 55 cents. It's still pretty cheap compared to a kabuki or no play, but compared to the kelp sculpture and the tortoise tamer, I think it's a little pricey. Now let me tell you about the time a show once hauled in a dead baby whale that had washed up on the beach in Kamakura to show in Okuyama. That's about 34 kilometers or 43 miles away. By the time it got there, it was nice and rotting. The poor thing stunk so bad that only the very brave dared to enter and marvel at its decomposing corpse. Now, of course, you can't have Misemono without having hoaxes. There was a unikoru, which is a unicorn that showed up in 1836, and the story behind it was that it was indigenous to the Sweden Sea. I couldn't find anything about tying some random horn to a horse's forehead, but I do have this image in my head. One of my favorite exhibitions was the wild and rare diminutive tiger that toured for a while. The unusual beast just happened to be the same shape and size of a domestic cat. As not to hear the telltale meows of a little feline, there was ordered a constant musical ensemble to be played nearby when customers were viewing the animal. Let's not forget one of the most famous strange beasties to appear at a Misemono, our friend the Fiji mermaid mummy. But she wasn't alone because there were also oni mummies, kappa mummies, and dragon mummies. It's said that what all Misemono had was something rare or extraordinary, an enclosure, a fixed price of admission, and a fanciful text for the exhibitor. For example, way back in 1449, there was a woman labeled the White Nun who traveled around Kyoto garnering attention. Now, it's assumed that she had albinism, but at the time it was a rarity. The story told around her was that she had become this way upon accidentally eating a merperson's meat. Remember what we said about that in the last episode: immortality. Finally, I want to pass on my absolute favorite story from all that I read about Misemono. This man and I, we could have been besties. Okay, so there's this guy, and he wants to join the Misemono. It sounds like he wasn't particularly exceptional in any way, but that didn't stop him. He didn't give up. Sure, he could have learned to papier-mâché incredible bonsai trees, juggle with his feet, or sculpt a seaweed in the image of the Buddha. But no, my hero covers himself in soot from head to toe, puts a rope around his neck, and stands outside the Misemono. There, he starts announcing to every passerby that he's a wild bear and he's just been captured in the province of Tomba. Also, if you give him a little money, he would growl and paw the ground. If you want to read more about Misemono, check out Andrew Marcus's article, The Carnival of Edo, Misemono Spectacles from Contemporary Accounts. It was published in the Harvard Journal of Asian Studies, and there is a wealth of good stuff in there. I'll put up a link on the website. Alrighty then, it looks like we've come to the end of our show. And I want to thank you all so much for listening and leaving reviews and spreading the word about us and helping me reach that little goal of 300 patrons by the end of the year. You all have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you again in 2 weeks. You've just reached the end of another episode of Uncanny Japan. Perhaps you'd like more. A monthly folktale translated and retold by me. The occasional binaurally mic'd soundscape like the ones you hear on this show. Or recipes, behind-the-curtain episodes, homemade postcards, and more. If you're interested in that or supporting the show in any way, please search for Uncanny Japan and Patreon. We've got a wonderful group over there. Thank you again for listening, supporting, reviewing, and telling your friends about the show. My name is Thersa Matsuura, and I will talk to you again soon.